The last time she hugged me, she flinched like I was a stranger. The last time I gave her money, she didn't even say thanks. But this morning, she wanted me to fix her car, cancel my meeting, and drive her to her massage. She handed me the keys like I was her assistant. So I smiled and said, "Don't ask me. I respect myself." She froze. Then she laughed. Not kindly. The kind of laugh that says, "Oh, you think you're someone now?" And right there, in our hallway, wearing her gym leggings and that smug smirk, she said it out loud. "You wouldn't survive a week without me." Thing is, I think she meant it. And that's exactly why I finally checked her iPad. I don't make a habit of snooping. I hate it, actually. But that morning, something in her voice didn't just sound arrogant. It sounded rehearsed. Like she'd been saying lines she picked up from somewhere. And it wasn't even the words that bothered me. It was how easy they came out. Like I was no longer a person to her, just a man-shaped utility. So when she left her iPad on the kitchen counter and went to shower, I didn't hesitate. No passcode. She trusted me with that, at least. I opened her messages app. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't flirty DMs. No shirtless guys. Nothing obvious. But there were long threads with a contact saved as Seedling Growth Coach Lana. At first I figured it was some life coach spam. But the deeper I read, the more I felt my stomach tighten. This coach wasn't giving advice, she was giving instructions. Stuff like, don't reward him with warmth until he meets your standards. If he questions your energy, tell him your alignment is sacred. Men like that need distance to evolve. You are the test. It sounded like a cult, but for marriage. And Lorna? She was responding like a disciple. I shut him down when he touched me today. I felt strong. He's starting to get confused. Good. He needs to. Should I ask for money again? Or make him chase first? I sat there rereading the messages, feeling like a lab rat inside my own home. Like I'd been living in an experiment I never agreed to. When she came out of the shower, she smiled at me for the first time in weeks. "Something wrong?" she asked, towel around her shoulders like nothing was off. I shook my head. I smiled back. But in my head, I started planning something she'd never expect. I didn't confront her that day, or the next. I didn't ask about Coach Lana. I didn't ask why she was scripting our marriage like it was a TED Talk on domination. I just watched. Something changes when you stop reacting. I became an observer in my own life. She didn't notice. In fact, the less I pushed back, the more confident she became. She started testing boundaries like a child who knows the parent isn't paying attention. One night, I pretended to be asleep while she whispered on the phone in the hallway. She didn't even lower her voice. I could hear everything. It wasn't romantic, but it was worse. She said things like, "He's still soft. I think I can break him fully by December. He's finally stopped asking for intimacy. That means it's working." And then this. "Once the business loan goes through, I'll move the funds to my account." Quietly. I blinked. Once. Twice. Just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I had helped her apply for that loan. My credit had co-signed it. My savings had backed the collateral. I thought it was for a boutique she was opening with her friend. She'd even show me mock-ups. Photos. Rent agreements. But in the dark, I realized none of it was real. Or worse, it was real, and she just planned to erase me from it entirely. Still, I didn't scream. I didn't explode. I simply rolled over in bed the next morning and said I felt a bit sick. She barely responded. But inside, a clock had started ticking. I was done being her test subject. And I was ready to become the lesson. The thing about being betrayed slowly is that it gives you time to practice your smile. I stopped checking her messages. Not because I trusted her, but because I didn't need more evidence. At some point, a man has to decide whether he wants to build a case or build an exit. I chose the second. Over the next few weeks, I gave her everything she wanted. I played the part of the broken, passive husband. I agreed to fund her business idea. I signed the bank papers. I nodded while she made empowering speeches about independence and alignment. And every time she talked about outgrowing our marriage, I pretended not to flinch. She rewarded me with fake kindness. She started calling me evolved. "You've changed," she'd say. "You're finally stepping back and letting me shine." But what she meant was, "You've stopped resisting. Now I can move faster." Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Every transfer, every email, every audio message that included her coach, feeding her lines about draining me emotionally so she could reclaim her power. I created backups. I encrypted folders. I recorded a video of myself explaining what was happening, just in case things went sideways. I even spoke to a lawyer on a lunch break without telling her. He looked at the paperwork and said, "She's building an empire with your money and your silence." I asked him if that was illegal. He said no, but it was definitely immoral. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach churn. She wasn't stealing from me. She was practicing on me. Because I wasn't her first. And I probably wouldn't have been her last. It started with the scent. Not perfume. Not cologne. Incense. Something faint and sweet, like burnt cinnamon or dried roses. I'd never smelled it before in our house, and I knew every scent Lorna ever wore. This one wasn't hers. It clung to her clothes when she came home late from planning night with her business partner. I asked what they were working on, and she said, "Spiritual branding. It's a holistic thing. You wouldn't get it." That was probably true. What I did get was that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. So that night, I waited until her breathing slowed beside me in bed. Then I slipped out, found her bag, and checked her wallet. No receipts. But her phone was still unlocked from earlier, left carelessly on the nightstand. I opened her calendar app. There were 2 recurring appointments. One was real, brand strategy with Jessa, Tuesdays. The other wasn't work-related at all. Every Thursday night for the past 6 weeks. Alignment session with our plus Lana at the farmhouse. That wasn't a nickname. That was a location, and not one I'd ever heard of. The next Thursday, I called in sick. Told Lorna I was crashing early. Kissed her on the cheek, said, "Thanks for being patient with me lately." She nodded like I was a student who had finally passed his first test. She left the house at 7:12 p.m. By 7:17, I was in my car, following her with the headlights off and my heartbeat louder than the engine. She didn't go downtown. She drove northeast, away from city lights. 40 minutes out, she pulled onto a gravel road behind what looked like an abandoned barn. There were other cars there. Expensive ones. I parked far back and waited. Watched. One by one, people walked toward the building, all in neutral colors, heads down. Lorna followed last. She was holding something wrapped in silk, small, round, glowing slightly. No idea what it was, but it didn't look like paperwork. I waited an hour, maybe 2. My hands shook from gripping the steering wheel. Finally, the barn doors creaked open. What I saw made my skin go cold. They weren't talking inside. They were chanting. And in the front of the room, standing on what looked like a rug surrounded by candles, was Lana. And beside her, a man with no shirt, just a wooden mask and ink covering his chest. And Lorna? She bowed to him. I didn't sleep that night. After she returned from whatever that session was, she climbed into bed smelling like herbs and firewood. Her hair was still damp, her hands cold, and she whispered, almost playfully, "You're still up?" I closed my eyes and pretended to snore. I couldn't risk her knowing I'd followed her. Not yet. The next day, I started digging. The farmhouse wasn't listed anywhere. No business registry. No yoga center. No event bookings. It didn't exist online. But one reverse image search later, using a screenshot I took of the barn's side panel, I found something that made my chest tighten. A blog. Long abandoned. Last updated in 2014. It was written by someone named Ransom Hale. He talked about sovereign masculine restoration, reclaiming natural hierarchy, and burning the false feminine mask. Most of it was cryptic, almost poetic, like a manifesto written by someone high on power and incense. One post stood out. The sacred bond is only possible when the woman breaks her husband's grip. She must reject him publicly, abandon him emotionally, and return to the circle willingly. Then, and only then, can she be seen as whole again. I stared at the screen for over an hour. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. Lorna's withdrawal, her coldness, the manipulation, the staged financial dependence, none of it was random. It was part of a ritualistic progression. A conversion. I had been cast in the role of the dying man. That night, I waited until she went to sleep, then searched her bag again. This time, I found a folded piece of paper inside a leather pouch. A note, handwritten. Carefully. Beautiful penmanship. It read, "Says the last test is the silence. You must not flinch when he dissolves. You must let the old man collapse. You are already free." I read it 3 times before I realized what he dissolves meant. She wasn't waiting for me to fight back. She was waiting for me to disappear. There's a moment when you stop asking why someone is trying to hurt you. You just start asking when they plan to finish. I reached that moment 3 days after I found the note. Lorna had grown lighter. Like the more I shrank, the more her energy swelled. She started humming in the kitchen, dancing when she thought I wasn't looking, laughing to herself when checking her phone. The same phone that now had a new passcode. She'd begun calling me Colin again, like a teacher gently correcting a slow student. And when I asked her if she wanted to grab dinner that weekend, she said with this dreamy little smirk, "Let's not ruin the energy we've built." That's when I made the decision. Not to explode. Not to scream or cry or plead. But to mirror her. I called out sick again Thursday. I parked outside the same farmhouse in a rental car, dressed in gray like the others. This time I walked closer. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I just filmed. Quietly. Steady hands. Long zoom. No flash. They were all barefoot inside. Lana was in a long linen dress, head shaved. Ransom stood next to her, shirtless again, but this time he wore what looked like black ceremonial gloves. Lorna stood on one knee before him, holding out a box wrapped in burlap. When he took it from her, she bowed so low her forehead touched the floorboards. He placed his hand on her head like he was baptizing her. And then I heard his voice, deep, slow, theatrical. "The hollow man has surrendered. You are now whole." The others in the room repeated it like a vow. "You are now whole." I felt nothing. No panic. No rage. Just this eerie calm. Like I was watching a funeral for a version of myself I no longer mourned. That night, back at home, Lorna crawled into bed and said softly, "You've been so still lately. I'm proud of you." I looked her in the eyes. And I smiled. Because I knew what I was about to do next. And it wasn't going to be still. The next morning, I didn't say a word. I packed a bag before sunrise. Just enough clothes, my laptop, the documents I'd saved, and one thing she didn't expect, silence. I left the house while she was meditating in the garden, whispering mantras into the soil like she was trying to grow a new version of herself. I paused by the door, wondering if I should say goodbye. But what would I even say? Goodbye to who? Instead, I slipped the envelope onto the kitchen table. Inside were 3 things. The notarized statement removing my name from the business, the video footage on a USB stick, and a note that simply said, "I watched. I learned. I left." Then I drove. For hours. Through towns I'd never stopped in, past gas stations that smelled like freedom, until I reached a rented apartment I'd signed the lease for 2 weeks earlier. Prepaid. Quiet. Mine. It took her 3 days to call. I didn't answer. Then a flood of messages. "You didn't have to leave. I thought we were in sync. You misunderstood everything. This is not what I would have wanted. Please come home. I need you." I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I sent one message to Lana, from a burner number, with a single photo of her, Ransom, and the entire ceremony, clear as day. No threats. No caption. Just truth. The coaching site was offline by morning. That chapter of my life? Gone. Not burned. Not destroyed. Just closed. And now? Now I'm learning how to exist without asking permission. I make my own coffee. I sleep in the middle of the bed. I read books without worrying if they align with the vibe. And I've started laughing again. Real laughter, not the quiet, nervous kind. Because I'm not hollow. I was just tired of being used as someone else's ritual.